It is finally that time of year where we pick the 10 best books of 2021, and let me tell you, it was a challenge. Oh, also, hi, welcome to an abundance of books. My name is Julia. In creating this list, I had the top 7 immediately. No question about these ones. Sure, you can shuffle some of them a little bit, but like, they're the best of the best. Which leaves us with 3 spots, which there was a lot of competition for, but also no competition for. There were quite a few things where I really love this book, but there's something wrong with it that makes me hesitate in recommending it or putting it in a top 10 list. So I am going to cheat a little bit, but not that much. So before we get into it, let me tell you what I was thinking about putting in my 10th spot and then decided not to. So I guess an honorable mention, which is all of the cult books that I read this year. The Project by Courtney Summers, Yes Daddy by Jonathan Parks-Ramage, and Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell, as well as Don't Call It a Cult by Sarah Berman. All great, but I think my enjoyment of these was in them collectively. Cultish especially is in a contender for the top spot, but it didn't focus on exactly what I wanted it to, but in combination with the rest of the books, I got what I wanted. So maybe we should do top 10 tropes of the year. Cults would definitely be near the top of that list. But that is not in the number 10 spot. What I am putting in the number 10 spot is The Deep by River Solomon, but just chapter 4. I talked about this when I read it for the first time. Chapter 4 is sort of like an origin story that I think could be read as a standalone. I have reread it within the past week, and I think you can understand everything, at least in combination with like the blurb for it. The Deep is about a race of Mer people who were born from enslaved women thrown off of ships and who were pregnant. And chapter 4 specifically follows the first, I think they call them historian. Probably should have checked that before recording. But basically all of their trauma is too great, so they put it onto one member of their society, and then all of those memories are passed down through generations. So for the rest of the story, you're following a historian farther down the line, but the first chapter is on the first historian and how they discover language, how they find a community. It's so interesting, and River Solomon's writing is beautiful. They have a real gift for that. This is also just such an interesting case because it's based off of a song that was based off of a book. It's a whole rabbit hole of media that you can fall down, and I would highly recommend it. I wouldn't say that the rest of the book is bad. Like, I gave it 4 stars overall. It's just what I am putting in my top 10 is chapter 4. Number 9 is One Day All This Will Be Yours by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Something that I didn't expect to be on the list until I was creating it, but this is just such a unique story and just a fun time, which you need every once in a while. This is about the last man on Earth, the only survivor of the causality wars, which were time travel wars, where he was an agent who would go back in time to change something, but then the other side would change something, which then affected who they were fighting in the future, and so they realized they weren't actually fighting for anything. So he has set up a trap, I guess, where anyone trying to travel past him in the future will get stuck and he murders them. But obviously some more stuff goes down and he ends up meeting some people and growing attached to them. He lives on this remote farm and he has a pet dinosaur. It's just so much fun. It's hard to talk about without spoilers because it's very short. I think it's around 200 pages and a surprising amount happens. It just made me love Adrian Tchaikovsky so much. He is a repeat on the top 10 list. Last year, his Children of Time was my 6th favorite book of the year, and just the range on this man is absolutely incredible. So I'm excited to read more of him in the future. Number 8 is another surprise, but in a good way, I guess. It is The Push by Ashley Audrain. This I'm saying is a surprise because it is marketed as a thriller, but it is definitely not a thriller, and I do not enjoy it for its thrillery elements. This is the kind of book that I wish I had a book club for. Like, if I ever create a book club, this is going to be the first book that we do, because there's so much to talk about with it. There's so many intricacies in the way that it's written. It has so much to say, especially about gender and intergenerational trauma, and you don't realize that going into it. You think it's going to be something fairly simple, but there's so many layers to it. There's so much complexity. This is about a woman, Blythe, let's say Blythe, who gives birth to her first child, Violet, and she thinks that Violet might be evil, I guess. She thinks that she has some violent tendencies, and her husband doesn't seem to believe her, and it's exploring their relationship through that, but also Blythe's relationship with her mother, and then also Blythe has a son and how that changes the whole dynamic of the family. This one also opens with an epigraph. It might be an epigraph. What is the definition of an epigraph anyway? Where it says that when a woman is born, she has all of her eggs inside of her, which I knew. But it also means that when your grandmother was pregnant, you as an egg existed inside of her, which just blows my mind and I think about constantly. And the fact that it had me, like it had me in its grips before page 1 is so impressive, and that it maintained that. There are certainly, maybe not thriller elements, but mystery elements, which I think do help propel the plot forward, so it keeps from becoming just a regular contemporary. There's also a bit of like, I don't know what to call it, intrigue. Blythe does some investigating that has some like good tension with it too. It's overall a really good book. I think you just have to go into it with the right expectations. Now we're into top 7, where there are no surprises for me here. There might be surprises for you. Number 7 is The Gilded Walls by Roshani Chokshi. This one, as soon as I read it, it felt like it was going to be an all-time favorite. Have I read either of the sequels? No, of course not, but probably eventually. This is about a group of young adults, teens, unclear, in the 1700s in Paris, who are magic and do some heists. The kickoff of it is that Severin has been dethroned as the head of his house. There are, I think, 5 magic families that sort of run Paris at the time. Or no, the world, because there's Russia too. And he has sort of been dethroned, and he's trying to prove himself and take back his rightful place. And the way to do that involves some heists. So you also have a bunch of his friends. It's a big cast of characters that all have interpersonal relationships with each other. Like, there's no one main character. Severin's plotline is the one like driving the story, but everyone plays an equal role. And there's a big web of relationships between them that are complicated, but like actually change through it. This one also I loved for Roshani Chokshi's writing, particularly in the mystery aspect of it. She is the master of setup and payoff. Everything in this book is intentional, and every detail is important and will pay off somewhere further down the line. Even within this book, like, there are sequels to this. I can't imagine how many seeds are planted in the first book that are going to carry through. It's such a fun read and masterfully done. This one I would recommend doing the audiobook at the same time as the physical book, because they do speak a lot of French, and being able to hear it is just more enjoyable and you don't feel as bogged down in it. Number 6 is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, which is very surprising because Beach Read by Emily Henry did not enjoy in the slightest, and yet now she's ended up in my top 10. This is a romance between Poppy and Alex, who have gone on vacation every summer for years until a couple years ago when something happened and they haven't gone on one since. But now they're reuniting, I believe, to go to Alex's brother's wedding, and you explore their relationships and learn what happened all those years ago. But the best part of this is you get flashbacks into all of the vacations that they've taken previously, and those sections felt so true to life. It felt like the way that I vacation, and it made me really feel close to these characters, and it's just such a fun book. I maintain that the Mike Wazowski joke in here is like one of my favorites. I think about it all the time. It's a rom-com where the com is the best part. The rom, they like, you get it. It's a friends to lovers, which I am not a huge fan of, but I bought it in this book. Hold for plane. We don't get planes here. That seems like an LA thing. I know that this is on a lot of people's best books of the year, and there's a reason for it. Highly recommend. Did I mention that I own all of the top 6, which is kind of funny, although half of them I read physically and then half of them I bought after finishing because I loved them so much, which means I was at least right about that. The 5th best book of the year is Neverworld Weight by Marisha Pessel. This is such a weird one too because there are objectively flaws with it. The writing is a little bit clunky. The characters aren't well fleshed out. This is single POV. It absolutely should have been multi-POV, but it's so good. There isn't a story like this out there, and I will take this story however I can get it. What is the story? What can I tell you about it? There's quite a few things going on in here, but it opens up with this group of high school friends who are now in college and they're coming back together for the first time, and they become unstuck from time and do a bit of a Groundhog Day loop for a while. They're supposed to decide which one of them should live. I don't think that's a spoiler, but it turns into something very different. It becomes a bit of a murder mystery as main character Beatrice, her boyfriend died when they were in, was it high school or was it college? It has to be high school, right? This is YA. I'm just gonna have to read it again and find out. But this has 3 distinct sections for me. The first one is a Groundhog Day story, the second is a murder mystery, and the third is House of Leaves, is how I've been describing it. But don't be intimidated by that. Like, this is a straight narrative. There's no turning this book upside down or anything. I think that if you're a fan of weird books or sci-fi, this is just something that has to be read to be believed. And something that I feel like I'm going to get something new out of every time that I reread it. I don't reread anything, but this I'm almost certainly going to. Number 4 is the Anthropocene reviewed by John Green. I like last year too, I had a nonfiction in the number 4 spot. So I'm glad I do read a good amount of nonfiction, and it's validating to know that I can love it as much as this. This is a collection of essays by John Green about the Anthropocene, which is the era that we're living in, and he rates things on a 5-star scale, and it's funny and it's touching and there's a good amount of science in here. There are essays on Kentucky bluegrass, on Auld Lang Syne, on the Notes app. Like, it doesn't seem like it should work, and yet it works so well. This is his first nonfiction book, and I think it's really where he shines. He's just got such an amazing voice. If you're a fan of the Vlogbrothers already, like, you're going to recognize the voice in here very distinctly. It made me laugh, it made me cry. I think if you're trying to get into nonfiction, like, this is such an easy thing to pick up. It's got, I don't know, 40 essays. So each one is only, what, 8 pages at that point? So it's really easy to get through. He's just so thoughtful and insightful, and I feel privileged almost to get this insight into his life. It's an amazing book. My 3rd best book of the year, I've forgotten what it's called, is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. How could I forget about this book? You all know this book. There's a vlog of me crying profusely while reading it. This is another one that sort of has to be read to be believed. It's about a bank robbery that goes wrong and the relationship between the hostages. A poignant comedy about a crime that never took place. A would-be bank robber who disappears into thin air, and 8 extremely anxious strangers who find they have more in common than they ever imagined. And I knew that blurb before going into this, but I don't think I picked up on the comedy part of it, because this is so funny. Maybe, I mean, all humor is subjective, but to me this was just chock full of, maybe it's like British antic humor. It is translated from Swedish, so maybe it's a translation thing, but I thought that the humor in this helped so much and helped you root for the characters, who then when they're like, here's my tragic backstory, you're bawling because of it. It is a bit of a weird book to read because you analyze the same scene from multiple perspectives. Once you get some backstory on a character, it sort of changes your perception of what's happening in a scene. So it can feel kind of slow sometimes, but I would really recommend reading this with the audiobook because the narrator on it is just incredible. She is at least half of the reason why I love this book so much, but I think now that I love it, reading it, I would be just fine. It's full of twists and turns and lovely characters, and I just love it. I didn't plan this well. I'm gonna run out of space. The 2nd best book that I read in 2021 is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. This took me totally by surprise. Well, it shouldn't have. It's a huge buzzy book, but the thing that everyone talks about in here is the twist, and I don't even want to talk about the twist because this had me from page 1. I think the writing in here is so compelling, and the relationship between Louise Adele and David is so interesting. It's a very domestic thriller, but in a way that you've never seen done before. The perspectives are perfect, the pacing is perfect. Obviously, I thought that the twist was perfect, but I think that even if you hate the twist in here, I think that there is a lot to be admired about it. It does such a good job of creating suspense and intrigue out of the mundane. I just love it, and I can't talk to you unless you've read it, so please read it. Yeah, that was inevitable. She really doesn't want to stay up, so we'll just put her there. And finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, the moment I've been waiting for, my best book of 2021 is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I'm so thrilled with this because I read this in December. Like, I didn't think there could be such a late addition to the game, but she came to play and she destroyed her competition. I do want to say, before I had read this, Anxious People was my best book of the year and Behind Her Eyes was second. But I switched it because I feel like Anxious People has a lot of similar themes and tone, sort of, to this book. And it felt weird to put them right next to each other. But like, all three are in an A+++ tier. This is the story of Wallace Price, who dies and is collected by a reaper and is taken to the ferryman's house, who is going to help him cross over to the other side, which is Under the Whispering Door. This book is everything that I wanted it to be, from the beautiful cover and the beautiful sprayed edges and the Illumicrate version that I got, which has this stunning artwork. It lives up to it on the inside. It's definitely a tough one to read. There's a lot of death and grief in here, but I think that's something that I already enjoy. I also just love death personified, which you get a bit in here in different aspects, I guess. The found family in here is incredible. The cast who live at the ferryman's house, including a ghost dog, so ghost dog. The banter between them and just the love that they have for each other is so palpable and so sweet and really balances out all of the tough stuff that is also going on. And I said at the time when I was reading this that I didn't want to talk too much about it because it feels so personal. Not that it's a reflection of real life, it just seems so important to me. Like, these characters are friends and I want to protect them at all costs. But I also want to shove them in your face to love them as much as I do. There are so many points in here that are really tough to read. There's a lot of bad stuff that can happen in the world, but I think this book does a good job of being able to balance it out and show the good parts just as much. Though there are still really bad things that happen, like the Alan bit in particular is really hard to read. It's tough. It's the kind of book where you have to be in a really good headspace for it. This story is also personal to the author. He lost his partner a couple of years back. I don't know the details, but you can feel that in the book. Like, that it is a personal story for him and a hard story to write, but I think that he does it with the utmost care. It's just the right level of magic for me. It's just the right level of humor versus serious stuff, and I think it toes the line of emotion really well. Like, it doesn't venture into anything exploitative. It's just a very heartfelt story. Even characters who show up that I didn't think I would like Desdemona, I ended up really liking her. Like, it just works. This certainly felt more adult than The House in the Cerulean Sea, but I think that was better for my taste, even though Cerulean Sea ended up on top 10 last year too, so we just have repeat authors all over the place. It's really surprising to me that my top book of the year is a fantasy, but it's just the right level for me, and I think it's mostly a character-driven story, which are things I don't usually say that I like. I'm more of a plot person, but I think I'm having to reassess that now because I want every book to make me feel the way this book made me feel. Okay, not exactly the way that this book made me feel, but close enough. So there you go. Those are my top 10 books of the year. I think it's a pretty good reflection of who I am as a reader, though certainly more contemporary and sappy than I was expecting. But maybe that's just what I needed from 2021, and I'm not complaining. If you have any interest in these books, please go read them. I would love to chat about them with you. This video just reminds me why I love reading. I'm getting emotional and that I can experience a story like this and know people who aren't real and care so much. It's incredible. I'm getting a flashing light, which is clearly the sign to stop being sappy and shut up. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will be back very soon with another one.